Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the first Marxism and Disability Network meeting of 2026. It's been a long winter break, but it is so lovely to see you all again today. We have a really exciting program this year, and I in particular have been looking forward to this presentation, which I think will really set the scene for some of the discussions that we'll be having in the upcoming months. Colleagues who have been members for a long time and have taken part in previous sessions will know how lengthy our discussions have been on the role of the labour process and the organisation of work and different sectors of the economy to disablement have been. And so I'm very, very excited tonight that we'll be able to really get in depth into some sectoral and some labour analysis of disablement, and hopefully maybe both refine and problematise some of the concepts that we've been dealing with over the last few years. So the piece of work that will be presented to us tonight has been put together by, I think, quite a large team of colleagues working across various institutions. And unfortunately, only two of them can present their findings tonight, although they will give us a brief introduction to other members of the team in their presentation. So I am delighted to join those two. Firstly, Annelies Scheers. Annelies is a postdoctoral researcher affiliated to the universities of Hasselt and KU Leuven. She works in social sciences and also at Leuven in the research group for economics, business, work and organizational studies. She's joined by her colleague Patrizia Zanoni. Patrizia is a full professor at Hasselt and is affiliated with the School of Social Sciences, which she was one of the founders of. Between 2018 and 2023, she held the chair of organizational studies at the Utrecht School of Governance at Utrecht University, and she did so on a part-time basis. The title of Annelies and Patrizia's talk is The Machinic Production of the Defective Worker, a techno-ableist analysis of labour in data-intensive warehousing. And I will now shut up and let them get on with telling us their findings. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Patrizia, would you like me, because I can't see anyone, so it's hard to read the room. Do you want me to quickly introduce the project? Or
yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you for the introduction. So today we're presenting a paper that is work in progress together with a big team that is mentioned on the slide, and a few of us are present here tonight. And together we actually formed for 3 years the ULOG team, Humans in Digital Logistics. And this was a project that I will just very briefly introduce before we go to the paper, because this paper is a product of the project. So it's nice to have some context on that. It was a project done in Belgium, Poland, and the UK, where we actually looked at the impact of technology in warehousing, specifically on the employment conditions and the working environments, more from a critical lens. And we wrote, we have like a policy report with a lot of recommendations of what we've learned, but we also have some academic papers, and the one we'll present today is one of them. So then I let Patrizia do the rest of the intro.
Yes. So, hi, everybody. Thank you for the invitation to present our works. I'm very happy to be here also with Annelies, Aneta, and Abby. We are here with 4 of the 7 authors. Annelies and I will present together. I'll start to introduce a little bit the paper and the type of conversation it wants to contribute to. As you can notice in the title, we are using for this paper a techno-ableist lens to interpret what we found in warehouses across countries, warehouses where very many technologies are used and combined, technologies that are data intensive, collect a lot of data, use the data to both organize the work and control the work. Maybe next slide, Annelies. So this specific paper is positioned within the broad debate on how technologies are fundamentally changing workplaces, the nature of work and the conditions of work, and also in this debate that is characterized by a very opposite kind of perspectives, a very optimistic understanding of what technology can do to improve working conditions on the one hand, but also increasing evidence of how technology actually is undermining working conditions by introducing very diffuse form of digital Tayloristic principle in work processes, and in this case in logistical processes. So this technology, especially there is a growing research on warehousing. Among these studies, quite a few deal with Amazon, but also in other logistical companies and warehouses where there is a quite consistent actually documentation of how technology are cutting jobs that were previously a little bit more broader and autonomous into very standardized, repetitive, easy tasks, fundamentally de-skilling what people have to do, and reducing their autonomy and discretion in how to do it, resulting in intensified workloads and also under increasing algorithmic surveillance. You can imagine within warehouses where the commodities or the parcels actually are stocked and then need to be retrieved and packaged and sent out. Digital interfaces and digital tools are more and more shaping how the whole work process is organized and directing very narrowly how workers are expected to work, and at the same time monitoring very closely how fast they do it, how correctly they do it, if they don't make mistakes, for example. This literature at the same time actually shows how this cutting and de-skilling of jobs allows this company more and more to rely on precariously employed personnel, so temporarily hired personnel, often through third parties, such as temporary employment agencies, but also all other kind of intermediaries. For example, in some cases, these are social economy companies that provide personnel that in a subsidized ways that wouldn't be able to find employment without support, or other types of vulnerable groups, such as, for example, people with a criminal record that are don't find easily jobs and are supported and led to these workplaces. So you see here at the same time, and this literature is quite consistent. On the one hand, de-skilling and eroding the conditions of labor within these warehouses, and on the other hand, an overrepresentation of very vulnerable types of workers that end up in these workplaces. Next slide, please. So at this time, we have actually a quite clear representation of or understanding of how warehouses are changing. And warehouses are today considered a little bit like pioneering or places where we can anticipate and see already today how work in the future might look like. They are considered a little bit labs for the future of work, because technology is really being adopted quite rapidly. And so they are often presented in the literature as telling us something more or further or more generalizable than only concerning logistics. And these studies really focus on how technology is changing jobs, both in terms of the nature of the work and the nature of the contractual conditions under which it is performed. What they do much less, however, is telling us or developing an analysis of how the deployment of these technologies is actually also changing how labor itself is seen within these workplaces. So they, let's say, if you want, from a Marxist perspective, they really remain quite tied to the materiality of the work process, which of course are enormously important to understand the power relations between the workers and the employer. But still, the analysis stop often at the quality of work that is eroded, and the fact that these vulnerable workers in precarious contract are less well placed to elicit value, to reclaim the value they produced through their work. And the whole idea, let's say, more ontological and epistemic aspect of how this change in the organization of work actually changes also how labor in its relationship to capital is understood, remains often outside the scope of this analysis. And this is exactly where this paper wants to contribute by really emphasizing and in the analysis the key role that language, ideology, and imaginaries of technology are playing in reconstituting the very understanding of what labor is within these places, and labor and the human more generally or more universally. Next slide, please. So the guiding research question of the paper is the following: how do dominant discursive constructions of these data-intensive technologies used in warehouses reconstitute human labor in this context, and with which implications for its relationship to capital? So it's definitely a critical analysis of labor in relation to capital, but not one that focuses on the materiality of works, but more the ideational dimension of the power relation. So next slide. So what we do, and this is perhaps the interesting thing for you as a group interested in the relationship between Marxism and disability, is we have decided to take a techno-ableist theoretical lens to theorize the human within these workplaces. And we found this lens very useful to understand and interpret what we found empirically, because technoableism, I'm not sure you are whether you are familiar with it, but it's a relatively recent branch of ableism which really emphasizes the key role technology plays in turning people into disabling people. The key role technology plays in disabling people in general. Of course, historically built on the experiences of people with impairments, but as all the tradition of theories of disability and ableism, understanding disability not in an essentialistic way, but rather as a core aspect of being human, and therefore potentially applicable and relevant for humans in general, and not only people with an impairment at any time. Building on this tradition of ableism, techno-ableism also emphasize how certain bodies and abilities are privileged in social contexts and become normalized and desirable. And more specifically, how technology helps to build these normative understandings of ideal bodies and embodied and cognitive perfections that come to define what it means to be human, and in the workplace, what becomes to be productive labor. A second aspect that is very important and that is very relevant, as we will show in the empirical finding, is the idea within technoableism that technology saves the individuals with impairments, represents a solution to human imperfections, and therefore is necessary for the disabled individual to attain humanity and perfection. And the second slide, when we apply this lens to the workplaces, this occurs, of course, also in other kind of social contexts, but certainly in productive context, in economic context, businesses such as the warehouse, this technology has a very strong role in establishing norms of productivity, which are very important, of course, because within companies, workers are considered productive resources and therefore in the first place evaluated based on the kind of economic value that they are seen to be able to produce. And technology therefore shapes in important ways expectations about what workers should be able to do in these productive processes, and how technology actually supports them in attaining those productive norms. And our core argument is that this theory of technoableism can be productively mobilized to explain how discourses of technologies really reshape not only the work practices, as the literature already documents quite convincingly, but also the very ontology of labor in these capitalist workplaces. I will pass the word to Annelies, who's going to take us into the rich empirical data we collected.
Thank you. So I will bring you to the empirical context of the study to give you also maybe a bit more context of the case that we studied, because warehousing, we don't know how familiar you are also with this context. So as we mentioned before, the project and this study looks at the context of warehousing. And as Patrizia already mentioned during the presentation, why warehousing is very interesting to study technology is because the warehousing context is often described as living labs for the future of work, future of technology, because there's a lot of experiments going on with technology. Technology is very present, a lot of trials and pilot testing and so on. So it's quite of an interesting context to look at the impact of technology. What is important to highlight or to understand is that while warehousing is very much induced with new technologies, and everywhere where you look, you will see technologies. I don't know if you notice on the pictures that we showed so far, there's always like a lot of technology present, but there's also always the human worker present. So that is also interesting in this case, related to the research question and the theory we want to use, is that in warehousing, the human worker is still quite very present and works together with the machine or the technology, rather than full automation, is happening. So that's an important one also to understand the case properly. And also, why is there such a big interest in technology within warehousing, but you also see it in other sectors in Europe? There are labor shortages. It's very hard to find people, especially because in warehousing, the employment conditions and the work conditions are not always that good. So they have a hard time to find workers that stay, and consequently, they often see technology as an answer to that issue. So as I mentioned before, this paper is part of a big project. And we also, we did a study, a project within 3 countries, but also in several companies within these countries. So in total, we collected data within 3 logistic companies, and more specifically within a warehouse in this company. And what we saw is that within the companies where we collected data, there was a lot of variation in the level of technology. Some warehouses were really highly high tech, like with parts of the operations like fully automated, while some of them were still mainly focusing on manual labor with some technology helping the human worker. So the cases were quite varied in terms of technology and also sectors. Most of the warehouses are third-party logistic warehouses, so they do the logistic work of an external party. But sometimes they also we also had some companies that did their own warehousing, for example, an automotive company or a food retailer and so on. And what is quite, or why we are very happy about the project is that we were able to really do a very extensive data analysis or data collection. We did a lot of interviews with people within the warehouses, so with the workers, with management, with the engineers on the site, with the labor market intermediaries on the site, so with like the whole network, but also the network around the warehouses, such as like local governments or technological consultants and providers, the unions, and so on. So we had a very broad network within this data that we collected. And also very important to show you is a bit of the technology that we came across. Because this is something that maybe not everyone is very familiar with. So I will take a little bit of time to briefly introduce you to the warehousing technology. So I have illustrations here of the technologies that we observed and that are also playing a role in our data analysis. The technology or the data-intensive technology that is very, very present is the software, the warehouse management systems. I'm not sure how aware you are with this term, but it's actually just the software behind the warehousing. It's like the software that connects all the technology, and it's very data intensive, and it organizes the work. It registers the work. So it's like a bit, the software behind the whole operations. And this system you see everywhere in every warehouse, and all the technology is connected to it. To the right, you see the digital interface tools. Those are the tools, the hardware that are connected to those software systems, which is the most popular one. And you also see it almost in every warehouse, is the handheld scanner, which an operator in a warehouse uses to work. They get instructions on the scanner through the warehouse management system, and the scanner guides them throughout the warehouse, tells them where to go, what to pick, and so on. The good-to-person system is like a more automated technology where you really have like full technological hardware that work fully automated. But the human worker is still present in the sense that the systems bring all the goods, collect all the goods, and bring them to a stationed worker that then does the packing at the end of the logistic cycle. There's a lot of robotics that we also saw in the warehouses. I shouldn't say a lot because it's maybe more rare because it's very expensive. But we saw some robotics, so technology that can work completely autonomously. Some human augmentation technology, but that was really, really rare. That's the technology like an exoskeleton that you can wear to actually help you move. And we also mentioned the wearables that monitor movements and biometrics, but those we actually didn't really see in the actual cases. But it's also an example of warehousing technology because they often talk about it if you talk to tech consults and so on. But so I think this gives a bit of a picture which technologies you can find in a warehouse. But then I will take you to the analysis, which is maybe more interesting.
Right. Annelies, just before you start the analysis, 12-minute warning.
Ooh, okay. Well, we're taking more time than I expected. Okay, a warning. I will keep an eye on the time. So we made an analysis based on the data that we have and the research question, and the analysis is split up in 4 parts. And the first part of the analysis actually shows, or will show you, because I will show you some of the data also, how technology, the presence of technology and the talking about technology is actually setting some new productive norms. What is being perceived as productive, as normal, and the implication is that this productive norm, which is tied to what technology can do, is actually disabling human labor. So there are some new machinic benchmarks of productivity because of the technology that is present in the warehouses. And you see that human workers are constantly compared to those benchmarks, and consequently also problematized as being a defective productive resource. They're not quick enough. They're not as productive as the machine. They're not as quick as the machine, not as efficient as the machine, and so on. And I will show you some of the data, also thinking about the time. For example, I have some quotes here that I think that will illustrate the point really well. A quote from an engineer who says that they've done a lot to increase productivity in their warehouse, but at a certain point, you hit the ceiling of what's possible through manual means. So they actually, this engineer says, what you can do with labor, it has a ceiling, but what you can do with technology to increase productivity, that has not this ceiling. It's not that limited. A second one is a warehouse worker that compares himself also to machines. Sometimes deliveries are really big. We simply can't handle all of it because, we're not machines. So you see this constantly comparison with machinic benchmarks, productivity norms that the human cannot achieve. A robot won't take sick leave, won't call in sick, won't be late. So this was very present in all our data, this constant comparison where the human worker loses. And we argue that this is actually a disabling of the human worker. The second point is that, the second part of the analysis, and this relates to what Patrizia mentioned before, that an important argument of the technoableism theory is that technology is also presented as saving the human. Technical saviorism, it is called. So the human worker is being disabled, being compared to a norm that they cannot achieve. And then you have the argument that technology will come in to actually save this human labor, help them out, fix the defective human worker. I'll also show you some of the data to make my argument a bit more clear. So it's argued, for example, in the first one, that the technologies have the capacity or the ability to make employees more productive. Another one is, even if you do it wrong, this is a warehouse worker, the scanner will not allow you or let you, it will give an error. So making a mistake will not be possible anymore because you have the technology that keeps an eye on you, that has control over your process, and that will guide you or warn you when you make a mistake. There's another one about the exoskeleton that I mentioned earlier. It's like the harness that you wear for some movements. And there the quote from a union representative is, those harness-like devices, you don't need any more strength. then the fourth one, making it easier for technology is making it easier for everyone, whether they're strong, fast, old, young. It will help them to cope with the performance they're asked to do. So it doesn't matter anymore if you're not strong, if you're too old, if you're making mistakes, if you're not productive enough. The technology will help you, will fix you to achieve the norm that you're expected to follow. The third part of the analysis is that we actually saw that because of this disabling effect and this technological saviorism, this also has an impact on how workers are being constructed, perceived, and they're more and more perceived as valueless residues, like a waste product. And there are two main arguments that we make in the analysis. And the first one is that we see that when people when the data speaks about who is then the ideal worker within this context, within this setting, they're mainly talking about workers, not per se as skilled, not as educated, no soft skills or whatever, but it's workers with some attitudinal traits, and I will show them in the next slides. And the second argument is also that they argue that the ideal warehouse worker is just an individual that can tend to the machine. So that is fully in service of the machine. Again, some quotes. So when in interviews, when we ask about who is the ideal worker, who works here or who should work here, the data argues that what is most important is that people are just willing to work. You need to have patience because it can be quite monotonous. You don't really need a brain anymore because with the scanners, you can just start right away as a newcomer. And then the fourth one, this is a quote where they talk about also when new people start in the warehouse. So once you get the voice interface, it's like a voice picking tool. You just need to enter a login and a password. You don't have to learn anything. You just show them once and they're ready to work. So it really shows that being a worker doesn't really mean anything anymore. You don't need to be skilled. You don't need to be educated or smart anymore. You don't need a brain. You actually just need to show up. And then the second argument is the tending to the machine that I mentioned earlier. So what we also see is that workers are more and more defined in terms of can they work with machines? Can they jump in when the machine fails? And so some quotes to highlight this. So some workers don't want to work with the machines. Well, I tell them, sorry, but it's no longer the profile we're looking for today. So they need to be able to work with the technology, but also, and those are the slides on the quotes on the left, when the technology fails, when something goes wrong, they need to be able to jump in and fix the machine, take off some glue, put the box back on the right row, and so on. The last one, I think I still have a few. We still have 10 minutes more or less, right?
No, so you have 6 minutes remaining.
6 minutes, okay, but I'm almost finished. Then
Okay.
Patrizia can wrap up the 5+ minutes. So the last argument of the analysis is that we actually see that all these dynamics are contributing to the erase of human labor from the perfect future of warehousing. So the data also talks a lot about how the future of warehousing, what does it look like? And more, the data speaks about erasing human labor from this future. Because if it is all technology and automation, this is like the perfect productive future image. And human labor is actually, a hindrance in this imaginary or vision. I will just show you some of the data, otherwise we'll run out of time. But so we have a lot of data also showing that when interviewees talk about the future, they're really preparing for a future without labor. For example, we have a Belgium case where they're actually currently investing a lot in automation in their warehouses. They're also expecting robotics to come in more and more because they're expecting robotics and technology to get better, to get nearer. They're also making sometimes a comparison that technology is just more attractive than human labor, the availability and the costs. And we also see this in the warehouse workers interviews where there actually is a threat that they will soon lose their jobs because of technology. So this was a bit quick maybe, but I will let Patrizia sum up and then maybe we can still talk about the data a bit more in the discussion. Okay.
So just to conclude, as you see in these 4 steps, you have a new relationship between labor and technology that fundamentally also reshapes the relationship between labor and capital. And we think that this kind of analysis that we conducted here really can kind of add something to the current debate on the future of work by showing how the labor is ontologically transformed into something that is defective, unproductive, and therefore not so desirable, and while at the same time constituting technology as something unavoidable, desirable, and essential for these companies to remain productive and competitive with, of course, with their competitor. Next slide. And this, of course, once you reconstitute labor in these terms, you structurally erode the labor's right to exist within productive spaces of contemporary warehouses, and you fundamentally undermine labor's claims to a fair share of the produced value, not only symbolically and in the discourse, but also in the material relations in the workplace. And you established, as we saw in the last phase of the analysis, a normative horizon of the future for the complete elimination of human labor, which might not in practice be completely possible, but nonetheless is performed continuously as part of the employment relations where capital really reconstitutes the other party, labor, as something that should in principle be eliminated to reach productive perfection and progress. So this is actually where we have landed at this time in the analysis. We think that the story more or less is there, and we are now actually writing it up. So we would really appreciate if you have any comments of reflections about it. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you guys very much. We usually take a short comfort break at this point, so a 5-minute break. I will open the Q&A section of the meeting now. Just as a reminder to comrades, there are 3 ways that you can raise a question. You can either use the raised hand function, that's probably the easiest one, or if you prefer to ask a question anonymously, you can type it in the chat, send it as a direct message to me, and I will relay it to the speakers. Or if neither of those are accessible to you, you can turn your camera on and wave as violently as you can, and hopefully I will see you, and we'll take it from there. So do we have any questions from the audience to get us going? Perhaps while people think up some, I'll abuse my position as chair and ask a couple myself. So one of these is just an empirical question, and the other one is a slightly critical conceptual question. So firstly, I was wondering, you outlined very clearly the role that the labour process in warehouses and the importation of technology into the relationship plays in disabling workers who already work there, shutting down their autonomy, constructing discourses of them as valueless and soon to be abolished, and so on and so forth. I was wondering if you'd come across any evidence related to the other elements of disablement, so the physical production of impairments. So I'm thinking in the UK case in particular, non-fatal workplace injuries are really quite common in logistics and transport. And the number of workers in the sector, I think it's around just under 2 million in Britain, are living with some kind of illness or health condition which they report as being caused by work. I was wondering what the role of technology had been in either producing impairments or, in your experience, in your findings, studying the rate of physical illness and harm to workers. So whether the other side of the production of disablement was evident in things that you'd found. And my slightly kind of critical conceptual question is, I think you guys are right, but I don't think you need any ableism framework for it, right? Like, it strikes me that the conceptual problems with the ableism concept, the circularity of it, like, why is there a differential valuing of different kinds of human beings? Well, it's because of a bunch of discursive practices. Well, how do we know those discursive practices cause that? Because we can see the valuation. It strikes me that just describing the technologies and the labor you use as different forms of capital would allow you to make the same argument without those kinds of conceptual fudges I think you always get when you're using ableism as a framework. So, like, I guess what I have in mind is technology is it's fixed capital, right? Or it's dead labor, which comes to, the more it's imported into a workplace, comes to dominate the workers further. And I was wondering whether there was a reason why you'd chosen ableism over those more kind of traditional Marxist concepts to make this case. I'll let you guys respond to that, and then I can see a hand in the audience. We'll take more questions then.
Where do we start?
Go ahead, Annelies, and maybe if Aneta or Abby want to add something, they can also jump in.
I can answer the first question, which is connected with empirical data. But
true, we've been working on the data.
Yeah, we've been working on the data last days intensively, so I could remind something. We don't find the example of typical injury due to technology, but we found the issue of somatic nature health problem related to technology use and the nature of work that is implemented in warehouses. Like, for instance, after 4 years of working during nights, the workers still cannot sleep. So that was the typical somatic issue, I would say. And maybe it doesn't respond the question of injuries, but that was, the very common example of health problems.
Yeah, maybe also something interesting to add to in the discussion of disability or impairment. So what is also interesting to give as context to you is that, so in the warehouses, we also have some sheltered workshops that are connected to the warehouses. So there is also some data on actual impairments and working in this context and so on. But I think, that we didn't include it in the data or the analysis because we actually really were focusing on the social construction of disability, which overarches actually everyone who is working in the warehouse. I'm not sure if that answers the question. It's just
I think there is this enclave, they call them, of people in sheltered workshop that operate within the warehouses, at least in the Belgian warehouses. Mm-hmm. There is also the fact that semi-automation or technology can make jobs lighter in terms of like not having to lift heavy weights. But at the same time, what it does create is it intensifies jobs and it makes them more monotonous, which again increases the likelihood of injuries because you have these repetitive movements that are always the same and that are very bad on your body, basically. Plus, of course, there is the mental aspect that the more monotonous jobs are, and the more they might create really mental problems to people certainly in the longer run. This said, like injuries and impairment, it's still not exactly the same. Of course, in the longer term, you might end up getting impaired because your health is compromised, right? So there are a few data, I think, that could speak to the issue of disability at work. I'm not sure I understand really your second comment on theory. I really do think that this kind of analysis is very, very different from a classical analysis from a LPT perspective, where you emphasize how technology is deployed by capital to control and to de-skill, which is, of course, the case, right? But here we really want to talk to the ontology of the humans as a productive factor, and being humans and what it means to be human within this context is really not within the scope of what LPT traditionally does. LPT does really start from a materialistic assumption of you have labor that is there because it's carrying out the job, and you have capital that is there because it has the property of the means of production, and it exploits labor. And of course, there are some aspects of identity in labor process theory that enter that process. So it's not a crude materialistic reading of the workplace. Absolutely not. But we think that, ableism is really a powerful lens, and certainly technoableism, which is a very recent new iteration of this concept, to tell us how technology in all kinds of social contexts is really redefining what humans are and what it means to be sufficiently perfect or sufficiently functional as a human. And in workplaces, this is particularly telling because people are hired to be productive. So if technology rewrites the norms about productivity and so structurally undermining the belief that human factors of production can be productive at all, this really redefines fundamentally the legitimate place of humans in these places. And that is, it puts an enormous pressure on the trade unions, for example, not to demand anything because they are completely put in the defensive. They are defined as unproductive and they need to be saved, and then they should be cancelled. And when they are there, they should actually take care of the machines and be subservient and be there and accept the monotony. So it's a powerful, hegemonic discourse. And what we maybe didn't emphasize enough is that we see this discourse really shared by all stakeholders. So it's not only management, it's the tech providers, it's the trade unions, it's the workers themselves. There are different declinations, but there is really a shared understanding of what is happening, and that is really extremely powerful.
Okay, I maybe this is something we can come back to, but thank you so much for your question. We're starting to get a few more questions coming in. So what I'm going to suggest we do is we take two, you respond to them, and then we take another two. So first up, I have Ariana, and then after Ariana, there'll be a question from Eliana. Ariana, away you go.
Yes, thanks so much for this amazing presentation and wonderful project. Yes, I think, I really love the idea of technoableism. And my question, and apologies if it's not very clear, is twofold. One would be, so you mentioned the role of trade unions, for example, about how they intervene in these dynamics and how they could how different strategies could be more useful. So my question is whether the ideational work that your analysis does, whether how this could contribute to revised strategies within the labor movement. And so maybe this is my main question, and as kind of sub question would be whether but that's my main question. But a kind of sub question is whether this technoableist lens could also be extended to think about ableism within work, within technologies of work more widely, or whether you feel that it's more specific to the workplaces you've been focusing on. Yes, thanks so much again.
Cheers, Ariana. Eliana?
I hope you can hear me. I'm sorry, but I don't have my camera with me. Yeah, thank you. I agree that the topic is really relevant in these times. I think like when it comes to technology and disability, I feel like it's been a narrative or an assumption about the neutrality of technology, whereas that's not true. And I actually find, Luke, that your question is really provocative, but I think I'm going to agree with the panelists that actually the ableism framework is really relevant, because I think I'm just still formulating my ideas while I'm posing the question, but I think within this context of technology not being neutral, the kind of raising of AI at the moment, and like seeing like something that completes the disabled human and make them actually an acceptable human in society. I think like the framework of the ableism is really, really relevant. And I was also thinking on like human computer interaction, and but particularly AT as something that I don't know if came up within your research, up to what extent assisted technology was seen part of the technology that disabled workers would use, and up to what extent that kind of falls within the narrative about, okay, if there is a disabled worker here, then requires assistive technology, then it's a worker that can be a non-disabled equivalent of a worker, if that makes sense. So yeah, as I said, I'm still formulating my ideas, but that's what I had in mind to share. But thank you for the panelists and for organizing this too.
Thank you. Should we react now to the questions?
Yes, if you'd be so kind, that'd be great.
Thank you both for the relevant questions. I'll reply to some of it, and then I'll look at my colleagues to jump in. Maybe I'll reply to the first question of Ariana. Also, thank you for the question, and nice to see you again also. I think what is it's interesting to talk also about the unions. That's why I picked the question, because I think when we started to do the data analysis or the data collection, we were expecting to find maybe a different narrative or discourse among the unions, but it is very present in our data that they're actually really repeating the same narrative that we showed within the analysis of these productive norms, disabling workers, looking at technology to save this human, but also talking about human labor as being less valuable and maybe erased in the future. So they actually really also have this narrative or discourse, which was for us quite surprising. And I think it's also very important to highlight that, especially if you think in what can the data or the analysis bring to the unions as strategies to intervene, that it is something we learned, the role of technology, the power of technology, that it is really underestimated in these also with the unions in our sample. I'm not sure if someone wants to pick in on that one.
Perhaps we should say that the unions in the three countries play very different roles.
Yeah.
So in Belgium, unions are very present, very institutionalized. It's a bit less adversarial than I would say in the UK. In the UK, there is a bit more variation. In Poland, they are generally weak, the union, comparatively, I would say. I think in our policy report, based on this same data, we have a lot of recommendations for the union to reclaim decisions about technology more, to reclaim their institutional role and to earlier in the technology adoption, to, because it changes jobs so much. I would say at the ideational level, it's very important that they understand how the narrative, the dominant narrative of capital, how is just taken for granted. Because of course it presents itself in very neutral terms and very much connoted to ideas of progress and productivity and, growth and economic welfare and stuff like that. And they, to a certain extent, buy into that. And so kind of creating some distance between the narrative and their own position and some reflectivity would already help a little bit, we would say. I don't know if anybody else wants to add on that.
Not on the union question, sorry.
No. And then for Eliana, I think it's very important that you mention AI. We must say that actually in these workplaces, we didn't find yet a very diffuse use and structural use of AI. AI is sometimes part of the technology, but it was not very dominant in the discourse and it's not yet super diffuse and super present. This said, I think that the lens of technoableism is particularly powerful to analyze any job where AI is structurally entering, because reflecting even on education, in higher education at the university, what is happening with students, for example. We have a lot of conversation, and I'm sure in every university this is going on right now. How do you need to change your pedagogy, your evaluation systems? What do you expect? What kind of competences actually do you have the ambition to learn to a generation that will have AI at their disposal? Do we still need to teach them how to write, etc.? And in this kind of conversations, then one of the questions I ask to my colleagues is, this thing about norms, because the moment you allow for the use of these technologies, you kind of establish another norm against which students will be evaluated. So those that might choose not to use the technology might not be able to meet the requirements. If you choose, for example, not to use AI to clean up your spelling, you might get, a lower grade than another student that does. So the more technology gets normalized in any process, the more the norms of what is expected and how you evaluate will evolve to take into consideration that technology. And that's really a major transformation. And those who do not use the technology will be seen as disabled in a way, as less productive, as deficient, because they will be more fallible, perhaps, on certain aspects. And then you had a question on assistive technology, and we already mentioned with Annelies, in the Belgian cases, these sheltered workshops were very structurally present, not only in logistics, they are present in all kinds of workplaces. And the interesting thing is that they often develop technology for the people with an impairment. But then there are spillover effects into the companies. So they become sometimes kind of consultants, because the technologies that they develop, of course, might be used for a broader group of workers. So I remember very clearly an interview with one of these engineers that was talking about a robotic arm to lift very heavy weights from the trucks into the warehouse, and how he was implementing this in the first place for the sheltered workshop workers, but also with the ambition to really diffuse it into the warehouses. So I guess this is a, interesting. And I've seen this in other places as well, that of course any technology that can help a specific group is not necessarily only helpful for that group, but might be more broadly deployed.
That's fabulous. We have had a comment in the chat that I'll just read out because it relates directly to the points that you guys made on AI in response to Aliana. And that's from our comrade Joe, who works in tech, and says that almost all of your main points apply very much the way that agentic AI is being weaponized by management to replace, or at least threaten to replace, human labor. So clearly there's a cross-sectoral dynamic here that you guys have identified. Okay, the next hand I see is from Mike Higgins. I don't see any other hands, but you will have an opportunity while Mike is pitching a question to signal that you'd like to ask the presenters something. So please take that opportunity. But first, over to you, Mike.
Well, that's very kind. Thank you very much. So there's so many questions actually that strike me about all of this. It's a very interesting discussion. And of course, I haven't either been able to read your slides as a blind person or been able to read any papers you might have submitted. That's more to do with my lackadaisical approach than it is to do with anything else. But obviously I've been busy, but nonetheless, thank you very, very much for this. It's very, very interesting. Mike, I have so many questions, I guess, but my fundamental question is about the social model of disability. To what extent is the attitude of the trade unions and of management reflective of a medical model approach? I mean, I can guess, but I'd like to hear what you think about that. And to what extent are the workers able to respond to that? But also, and again, I'll try and restrict myself, but again, I have, as is my wont in these situations, have so many subdividing questions about that. I guess the next one would be about class, because you talk about the warehousing staff, not exactly as an homogenous group, but at least I didn't hear, I may have missed it, in your contributions, any distinctions around class. Now, obviously, within a warehouse context, there are managers, there are supervisors, and there are, forgive me, the drones. I don't mean it literally, but the people who actually do the work, who drive the forklift trucks, who load the vehicles, and so on and so forth. To what extent are disabled people represented across the spectrum of work in the warehouse, if you know, and warehouses, if you know, and in terms of different impairments, is there any hierarchy? Sneaking one in there. Is there any hierarchy around impairments? So, do you have certain people who are identified as disabled people who are able to command a more senior position? Or is it not as complicated as that, or not even as simple as that, actually? So I've probably asked far too many questions already, but thank you for tolerating my questions.
What we'll do is, as there were a few there, I'll let you guys respond to those first before we move to anybody else.
Thank you. I will quickly answer one. Yeah, is it okay, Patrizia? Yeah. Thank you, Mike, for the questions. They're also really relevant questions. Maybe something I can address is the question regarding class. I think there's definitely a class aspect going on in the sense, if you look at the whole warehouse and how it is segmented or how it is structured, related to technology. So, for example, in these sheltered workshops, they hire people with impairments, very varied group, I would say. But for example, in the discussion of technology and the disabling power of technology, when in the interviews they talk about the sheltered workshops, those are often the jobs that are named that will disappear first. While, for example, on the other spectrum, if you look at management positions, which are quite also class related, it's often male, white, no migrant backgrounds, no impairments, and so on. Technology will be mostly used to enhance those kind of jobs. And then, of course, you have the warehouse operators, like the bigger group that don't work in the shelter workshops. That's the story that we told today in the presentation. But of course, I think the impact of technology on jobs from the extent to disappearing or enhancing or getting more precarious is very class related. That's my...
Yeah, I think in this presentation, we really focus on these operative jobs, right? So the pickers, the people that go and retrieve all these parcels, and then or the stowers that put the parcels there. Of course, in a warehouse, you have a lot of other jobs as well. But in terms of numbers, this is really the core of the workforce. And this is the segment of the workforce that is lowest and that is most impacted by all these technology decisions, because they are so numerous, they also represent a very large part of the labor cost. And it's those costs that management, of course, wants to cut by increasing productivity and eliminating labor under a situation of relative scarcity of labor available to do this kind of shitty jobs at these conditions that, at the pay they are paid and at the conditions they are in. So they are also confronted with shortages of labor for the conditions they can offer. And therefore, you have really an incentive to increase productivity, further eliminate labor, and you enter in this vicious circle of, lower and lower. Annelies mentioned that the sheltered workshop workers indeed are mentioned that as those that will be eliminated, but this is because, at least in the cases we have, these people are people with a slight mental disability. And so typically these jobs are described as very simple jobs. So it's not physical disability, it's mental disability, and it's simple jobs. And of course, the more standardized a job is, the easier it is to automate it, right? The more, and therefore there is this mentioning that these jobs might disappear. There are other types of fragmentation within this working class, and this is across the countries. You have overrepresentation of migrants, for example, certainly also in the more temporary kind of contracts. And also more and more, especially in Belgium, where we still have unemployment benefits that historically are have been generous, relatively generous. There is now a whole new wave of activation where the both unemployed but also people that are not on the labor market at all need to be activated to enter the labor market. And of course, the people that are not active on the labor market generally have a reason not to be in paid work. And there you might have a number of vulnerable profiles that will be pushed towards the workplaces. And logistics is always one of the key sectors, next to, for example, domestic services, next to sometimes the lower jobs in the care sector. Or in construction, there is less and less manufacturing, so that's a bit more. But logistics is certainly one of the jobs that are immediately thought of when the unemployed and the non-active need to be activated.
Could I jump
in? Thank you for that contribution. That's been really helpful. And there's lots more to ask, but thank you. That's been really, really clarifying. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Appreciate that. Abby, I believe you were next with a question.
Yeah, sorry, it wasn't a question. I'm on my phone, so I'm not able to raise my hand. But I just wanted to add a point on the class issue. I think although we didn't present findings about kind of the impact of technology on managers, I think it's quite interesting to consider how they're more in a position to resist narratives around how technology is impacting their work. So we quite often saw the use of warehouse management systems, for example, took away quite a lot of the jobs that managers would have to do previously, like schedule rotas, surveil workers, and so on. But because of the power that these managers hold, they're able to kind of reconfigure how that looks in relation to their skill set and the things that they're required to do, if that makes sense. So it doesn't devalue their role in the same way as it devalues the role of a warehouse operative. And I think that's where the class imbalance comes in as well as something to consider. But yeah, sorry to just jump in there.
No, that's really useful, and I think is particularly helpful in thinking about the distribution of forms of domination through technology as well, and also how skill accreditation plays into that, which you guys will know from LPT. Never disappears, I guess. But it's really handy to have it laid out here. So I have a hand from Ariana, but I'm also aware that we're going back now to peeps who've already had a chance to answer a question, and we have 10 minutes left. So what I will say is that if you have not spoken already and you have a burning question, please do jump in as quickly as possible. And I will take Ariana now, but I will then prioritize you as soon as that question is finished. So Ariana, do you want to go? And then we'll hopefully have another question afterwards.
Yes, yes, very quickly. Yeah, you were mentioning, yeah, sorry, I'll try to be quick. Yes, so it's whether you have any, I found very fascinating what you were suggesting about people who are not in work, who have a reason not to, and how this technoableist frameworks can be operationalized to push people into work, to make work accessible to people in a way. So my question is whether you have any record of, I don't know, welfare to work programs in any country, or whatever their name is in the country. Whether you have any record of welfare to work programs making the case, maybe, or actually forcing people into work based on the idea that technology will help them overcome their limitations and so on. Thanks so much.
This is a super relevant question, I think. We don't have directly, exactly this, but as I said, in another project, for example, logistic is one of the key, sector where these trajectories, welfare to work is targeting. This is also confirmed by the Public Employment Agency that where they told us, for example, that people that are looking for a job, they often indicate logistics, as something they could be able to do. So there is also a shared kind of understanding that these jobs at the very end of the labor market are an entry point into the labor market. And on the other side, even in our recommendations, in our policy report, one of the 6 recommendations we formulated was to think of this technology much more in terms of how they could be deployed for more inclusive workplaces. So in that sense, it speaks to your question and also the previous question. Technology, of course, is never neutral, but because it changes the nature of jobs, it can also be deployed really to make jobs more accessible to a broader pool of workers or people that are willing to take up those jobs. But right now, what we have found in the field is that technology is really introduced not with that intent. The human considerations or the impact of new technologies on the human comes really late as a consideration in the process, so oftentimes only when it becomes clear what it does to human workers, once it's already implemented. And that, therefore, I mean, it's also a missed chance to make workplaces more inclusive. And we recommended both to the employers but also to the trade unions to really think in that terms. For example, technology can be used. A very common example is to make language, to eliminate part of the language barriers in the workplace, because screens can be, of course, programmed in multiple languages, so it can be more adapted. Other colleagues of us are working, for example, on how algorithmic management could, in theory at least, provide some choices to individual workers. So leaving them some autonomy in choosing how to work if they were programmed to do so. So there is also a lot of potentiality that we are actually not seeing that much, but that would technologically be possible. The question is if it's economically interesting from an employer's point of view, of course, but it could. The moment that the workforce is super scarce and not everything can be automated, then it might become even economically interesting. I don't know if somebody else has something to add on this point.
Not really. I wrote down some points that you also mentioned. I think that indeed, and it's also part of an analysis, is that you see that the technologies are, the argument comes, it will make jobs super accessible. Anyone can do the job. We also had a lot of examples in the Belgium case. I'm not sure if I can speak for the others, of some projects that they tried to set up with people, with newcomers in Belgium, like all these kind of projects. They are quite desperate to look for anyone to come and do the job. But the difference between a good welfare to workfare program and these strategies is that it comes from an economic strategy to be more productive and not per se to offer quality jobs. But yeah, I think that's what Patrizia said more or less. So yeah.
Cool. We have one other question from the chat, which is from Mike, which I guess I'm going to combine with the other question I would ask. So Mike's really interested in what understandings of disability or disablement you guys encountered within the trade unions and amongst management, i.e., was there an understanding that this was a process of disabling workers, or was there an awareness or a particular conceptualization that managers or unions had when deciding or thinking about the use of these technologies, particularly in the sheltered workshop context? I guess my kind of addendum to Mike's point, and this would return to the kind of provocative question about ableism, would be something like, what's the evidence that, let's take the trade unions in particular, what's the evidence that the unions accepted the kind of picture of technology as a form of perfectibility of the person that you guys outlined when you described technoableism? Because listening to Patrizia's explanation earlier of the union reasoning, I thought, that sounds incredibly plausible to me, but it sounded to me like the old union logic of, well, we accept, when it comes to introduction of technology and productivity, we accept temporary job losses for long-term pay increases. And just institutionally, that's what they're incentivized to do, because the people who are losing their jobs either aren't members or are very low dues paying members. And that to me doesn't, at least discursively, have much to do with the idea of infinite perfectibility or the elimination of the imperfect from the public sphere. So that's my addendum to Mike's point. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Can I maybe quickly start with replying to Mike? Because when you first asked questions, I still had a question that I wanted to answer to, and it relates maybe to the question that you wrote in the chat regarding the models of disability. And the question also, if management and unions or whoever we interviewed were aware of this disabling effect, or and I think that's an important question. If you look at the interviews or the data, and how people talk about technology, and this relates to all the people that we interviewed, I think the more nuanced or critical ones were the workers themselves. You have really this narrative that we show in the analysis of this saviorism, and technoableism actually shows a bit the opposite. They're not aware of this disabling effect because they see something that can enable, empower, fix the workers. And related to that, in the data, I think the medical approach of disability was much more present, and this is also maybe an issue why, or an answer to why the unions were not as critical as we thought they would be. because a lot of the conversations with the unions, but also, for example, with health, how do you call them? Professionals are mainly about this medical model. Because, of course, in warehouses, there is a lot of going on. A lot of people talk about the fact that you can't work there until after your 40s. You can't work there as a woman because it's really physically hard work. There's a lot of injuries, a lot of accidents. So there is a lot of focus also on this medical approach, which maybe sometimes is prioritized by the unions compared to other aspects. So yeah, that was still an answer to the question you asked earlier. That's it for me, from me.
Maybe Joe can explain the question in the chat. So technology that is not used in the workplace. That's an intriguing question. We only focused on the technology that was present, and the one, that is not present. You mean to protect the workers?
Yeah, I'm just thinking of technology as like exclusion, I guess, as well. So like here, like we've got a class of what is proletarianized workers who are being, assimilated, into the workplace, maybe with all of the, say, positive technologies or supposedly positive technologies. But here there's like exclusionary technology, like instead of technology always being seen to be this progressive force which moves forward, here you're actually like choosing to like ignore a technology or even go regressive. I'm sure there's plenty of other like lack of easy technologies, like simply like a wheelchair ramp that you could put into workplaces as well. I'm thinking this kind of thing maybe stretches the definition of technology. I don't know, but it feels related to your guys' point.
Well, the technology we really looked at was really the productive technology, right? So not the technology you would offer an individual to make him productive, but something that you would introduce structurally to increase productivity. And so we really started from the work process and then looked at what it did to the human, following the logic of technoableism. I would expect, for individual cases, according to the legislation, for technology to be introduced, if it's reasonable, it's also paid back. But we didn't really observe this, I think, empirically.
And maybe to add an individual approach, it's like the interviews that I had, I can only also speak for the Belgium case now. It's not something they do. So we looked at this specific technology that Patrizia just explained, because that's very present, but like while they say it's inclusive, everyone can do the job, really adjusting the work process to an individual, that did not happen. And I had some interviews with HR also that they explicitly say it. If you have a work injury and you for an extended amount of time, you can't do a certain handling or movement, we can accommodate that for a while, but this workplace will not be for you anymore afterwards. So yeah, on an individual level, it was less of the analysis because it was maybe less present, if I understood the discussion correctly.
No,
that's wonderful, guys. I'm just aware of the time. We are just coming up to the scheduled end of the meeting. So firstly, I would like to thank you, Patrizia, Annelies, and the other co-authors who are here for being so generous with us in the Q&A. I think this has been a really constructive and, if you'll pardon the pun, productive conversation. Please do let us know when the paper is published. We'd be delighted to read it and we'll circulate it around the network. Thank you also for the very rich presentation section of the evening. That's really thought-provoking. And we have spent more time than we usually do in Q&A, but I still feel that we're only scratching the surface. So always good to leave us wanting more. Final parish announcements. The next seminar of the Marxism and Disability Network will be slightly sooner than usual. It will be on April the 14th, and that will be Sofia Rehetti talking about Crip Time and the pedagogy of resistance under capitalism. After that, we will be back in a more standard schedule of once a month, but please do forgive us. A few things have required us to be a little bit more irregular in March and April than we'd usually like to be.